Okay, so it depends on what is going to be discussed. Okay, but what if you don't know what's going to be discussed because the person said, "Pastor, can I see you?" and you don't know? So what do you do?
This kind of
It's okay. Okay, it doesn't matter. Right. Okay, how about others? Presenta no, doesn't matter at all. Right. How about others? What's your sage advice on this?
sir,
Jeno? Yes.
a combination of life, but usually, like I kind of agree with those comments out there, but I also agree with saying that it's a case-to-case basis, I'd say.
Yeah. Okay, hope we can be heard. Right. So again, the wise principle here of either keeping the door open or keeping it closed is really at the risk of inappropriate behavior, being accused of inappropriate behavior. So that's really one thing. But again, if you keep the door open, the counseling might feel insecure in sharing. So that's what we were talking about a while ago. But a closed door might promote inappropriate behavior from either party. And so, what's the best way to handle this? Again, there's no, as I've said, there's no really fixed rule on this. If you want to close the door, make sure you do not lock it. It should not be locked. Door should not be locked. And I hope you make it clear there. I hope you make it clear to people outside, whether that will be the other staff in church or other people who might be your people who are working in church, that there are people inside. Make it noticeable that there's something going on inside, counseling going on inside. Right? But if you have the budget, build a transparent window where both of you can be seen inside without being heard. A window, like some doors can be placed with windows, right? Square. If you notice the offices below, the faculty office below, the door has windows, glass windows. So that can help you, even if you close the door, that can help people outside know there's something serious going on inside. I don't need to disturb, right? Or this is not my business. So I just need to just pass by. I just need to pass by. I don't need to stay for this. So a glass window on the door will be very helpful, or a glass door itself, right? A tinted glass door or glass window would help in being the middle way of keeping the door open or ajar. As what Luciana said, in my own practice, I keep the door open when it's the opposite sex, at least ajar. But in the end, I let the counselee decide first. Are you comfortable it being open or closed? So he or she can make the decision for herself or himself. And sometimes the person will say, let's keep the door open. Okay, let's keep the door open. But when the sharing becomes more serious, sometimes they want to close the door. So it's really going to be your call, both of you, right? Okay. Welcome to our online students who just came in. I'm so sorry I wasn't able to admit you earlier. I was
Sir?
busy with the presentation. Yes, Rodelio, you were about to say something?
Yes, sir. A while ago, you said if it when you close the door to make the counselee feel better. If the door is closed, excuse me, can I make can I record the conversation? Is it possible?
Recording.
Yes.
Recording must always be with the consent of the one being counseled. And state your reason why you're recording.
Oh,
Why is it needed to be recorded? Right?
okay.
Normally, recording can be threatening. Can be threatening to some people because it might be used against them, or confidentiality. Somebody might find the recording. So for some people, they feel uncomfortable with being recorded during counseling. So you really have to make your purpose clear. Why are you recording, right? And how are you going to ensure that no one will find your recording? Right. Even your notes, even if you want to take notes, you must ask the permission of the client. Can I take notes? So just I can follow, I can review our conversation, right? So always with the consent of your counselee.
So, sir, inside the room, CCTV is not allowed.
You can put CCTV in a counseling room, as long as you do not record. Again, you have to tell your client, we are being audio recorded. Is that okay for you? If he or she says no, then what are you going to do about it?
Okay.
Right. So CCTV, the video, some CCTVs don't have audio. So video I think is okay if there's no audio. But again, if you record audio, I think you should really ask the consent of your counselor. Why you're recording, how are you going to keep it, and how are you going to destroy it? Right? How long are you going to keep it? So are you going to keep it for 5 months, 6 months, a year? And how are you going to dispose of it? So all this must be shared to the counseling. Right?
Thank you, sir.
Right, thank you. Yeah, first meeting and building trust. Again, greet your client with a smile. Don't overdo it. Don't be a showman. Be your authentic self when you greet the client. Again, congruence. And beginning the counseling itself, the sharing can be very intimidating. So make your counseling feel that you are there to listen and you are there not to judge, right? And you are there to help. So some counselors will feel intimidated and share. They're gonna open their life. They're gonna share their life with you. And so you're there to facilitate openness. So you can say something like this. Joshua, can you read the sample script? Start anywhere. Or mind. Correct, right? So yeah, you can begin with something like that. Don't just sit there and wait. You can comfort first, your counseling. I'm here to help you. You can start with wherever you want to start. I think that's a good phrase. Start with wherever you want to start. So that will give your client some form of empowerment and agency, control, because they will feel intimidated, especially if you're the pastor. They're used to seeing you preach with authority. So when they come there, they might be intimidated. Oh, I'm talking to the pastor. I might get judged, or I might be the next illustration for the preaching. Please don't do that, by the way. Using your counseling as your preaching illustration. Don't do that. He or she will not come back to you anymore. Right? So that phrase, start with wherever you want to start, can be a good formula to facilitate openness. Confidentiality. Everything that the counselor will say to you is confidential. It should not be shared to anyone else. Unless, again, there's always an exception to our rule. Unless when there is reason for you, what? To suspect danger. If there's reason for you to suspect danger, like the person threatening to kill him or herself, harm him or herself, or harm others, then there's a responsibility for us to break confidentiality when we suspect the threat to life. Threat to life. Explain this to your counselor beforehand, before you start. Everything here will be confidential. But I hope you understand that if you say anything that will endanger you or anyone, I may be forced to break confidentiality. Is that okay with you? So make it clear at the onset that confidentiality has its limits. Especially, again, particularly when there is threat to life. Yes, Rich.
Illegal activity.
Right.
Is there an obligation to go to law, to the authorities?
That's
abuse,
right,
or something like that.
Right. For instance, as well, if you're a school counselor and you know that the student is breaking some school policies like drinking or drugs, again, breaking some law or breaking some policy. And that's very tricky. I haven't encountered something that would require me to go to the police. But I think this will be the rule when it comes to situations like that. When there's a gray line, right? Consult someone who may be more knowledgeable about you on this. Right? Without fully disclosing who the person is, consult someone. It can be your supervisor in counseling, or it can be another colleague, another pastor, or it can be a friend who has more relevant knowledge and more than you on that matter. So consultation. Aha. Karatista, wag naman. Right. No, not karatista. Consult someone who may have more knowledge about you on a certain situation. But again, you counselors, you pastors, pastoral counselors, it's really your call, right? It's gonna be your call when you're there. But again, the rule is when there's threat to life, harm to oneself or to another, that's the principle is we can break confidentiality when that happens. What about child abuse? Yes, Joshua. Mm. Mm.
And when I confidential
Mm.
under his heart
Mm.
would prevent him or her from sharing
Mm.
their property.
Yeah, that can also happen, right? When you say to the counselor at the onset, confidentiality has limits, and in the respect to life, or danger, confidentiality has their limits, right? And you're saying that may prevent the counselor from sharing, right? Yeah, that can happen. Um, um, for me, the way I would handle that is I'd ask the counselee, if it's threat to life. It's interesting. I had a counselee where this person was also a psychology major, and she knows all these protocols about confidentiality and such, and a threat to life. And I really found it hard to negotiate. Again, it's really your call at that moment. But when she shared to me, I'm thinking about suicide. I'm thinking about harming myself. And but again, she's a psychology major, so she knows all these protocols. She told me, don't tell anyone else, because she knows I'm bound to tell somebody if she expresses harm. She knows that, and she told me, don't tell anyone else. And I said, oh my goodness, how am I going? How am I going to go through this? And so I made a promise with her. Okay, this is your call. This is gonna be your decision. You're gonna make a decision. You're gonna take a risk. What I did was, I said, I'm not gonna tell your parents, but promise me. Let's make a promise that if you ever have thoughts of really harming yourself, call me. Call me. And so she said, okay. And I was so assured. She reassured me that if ever she would think of harming herself, actually harming herself, she would call me first before doing anything else. Right? So those are some negotiations that you can do in the counseling relationship. What about abuse, child abuse? You know that the child, this teenagers, is being abused at home. What do you do? Talk to the counselor. Do you need help for me to go to the police to help you? And she says yes, then help her. Facilitate ways how you can help her to be rescued. Right? But if no, that's the heartbreaking part. It's the tragic part. What can you do? If it's a situation is so complicated that the person doesn't want you to do anything for her. And again, there's a risk. You can say, my hands are tied, I can't do anything. The counselor doesn't want me to do anything for her. Then you take the risk. You continue to persuade. Maybe, come on, don't you really want me to go to the police and help you? Maybe you can continue to persuade. Right? But again, my rule is, Joshua, is we must always empower the client, the counselee. We must always empower them to make that decision for themselves. So you can always negotiate with your counselee. So again, these are very complex cases, and it's gonna be your call on that moment, in that moment. Any thoughts on what we're talking about confidentiality and danger? Rich?
Is there any legal, liability if there's a crime being committed and and you're not saying it? There's a crime being, I don't know how it's in the Philippines or anything like that, but
Right.
in some cases, if it goes to court, could you be held liable
For not saying
for
anything.
not going to the authorities?
Right. That I'm not sure yet. The professionalization of counseling in the Philippines is actually very young. It's just maybe 10 years old. So I haven't updated myself if counselors can have some liability in court. But what I know is counselors can be called to a hearing to share some information to help the case. Right. So yeah, that's a good thing to research on if counselors can be liable if they don't share. And so that's why counselors, we have the rule to break confidentiality if ever there's really somebody in danger. That's really the principle there. There's one counselor who broke confidentiality, went to the police, and filed a case against a husband who battered his wife, and that really went very complicated. The other party, the husband's party, wants to file a case against the counselor for breaking confidentiality. So, and the counselor almost lost her license to practice. But eventually, the husband was convicted. Right. So, this can be very complex. Counseling can be very complex. It can be very complex. But again, I hope this can guide us in our practice. Confidentiality, breaking confidentiality with respect to life, empowering the client to make that decision for themselves, helping them arrive at that decision. Right? Okay. Any more? Okay, let's continue. Time. We talked about time before. Don't allow yourself to be worn out by talking for 2 hours or 3 hours. Right? Keep it at a minimum of an hour or 15 minutes, 15 minutes. You may relay this to your counselor at the very beginning. We have 1 hour to talk. Is that fine? Keeping them aware that there's a time limit to talking. Why? Talking is exhausting. Listening to somebody pour out their problems is exhausting. And after an hour, you are not that effective anymore. So it's also for you. It's also for her, for him, the counseling. Because after an hour, you get tired. Therefore, you are not as sharp as you are. So keep your counseling limited to an hour or 15 minutes, 50. Keep a time frame. Because if you continue to talk for 2 hours, then that's gonna happen again. And that's gonna happen again. And that's gonna happen again. You'll have a hard time stopping if you make that as a habit. Right? So keep it to an hour. We call it the healing hour or the therapeutic hour. This is our therapeutic hour. So let's use it wisely. Okay? You can extend your time if you plan it, but don't make it a habit to always talk for more than an hour, 2 hours. You can say, you can remind your counselee as well, your counselee. Right, we only have 10 minutes left. You were saying, but it's not gonna be so blunt, right? So forward. You have 10 minutes left. That will facilitate, that will create some intimidation to your counselee. So you can say it in a way that's smooth, right? You have 10 minutes left. You were saying, you can segue to what he or she was saying. So we have 5 minutes left. You were telling me, okay, to avoid awkwardness. Right. Frequency. How often? You can have once a week, but the best, if once a week when the problem is really difficult and needs more guidance, once a week can be advisable. Not every day, once a week. If the problem has gotten better and more manageable, it can be twice a week. Okay, and it can be from 4 to 10 sessions. 4 to 10 sessions. So the longest is 10. 10 is actually very long. Okay, in what I have experienced, 4 has been the average in my experience. You can also do intermittent sessions, like as needed. As needed. Right? Again, why do we have limits to counseling? Again, to avoid unhealthy dependency and to build on the strengths of our counselees. So how about beyond the counseling relationship? Now, this is very difficult for pastors because we get to see our counselees every week or regularly, right? Regularly. So it's really going to take a lot of sensitivity, self-awareness, right? We must still observe boundaries even if we have a past parishioner counseling relationship. Do not engage in any communication that will suggest any romantic intention or any sexual intention to our counselees. Any innuendos, right? So don't engage anything in any communication that will suggest things like that outside of the counseling relationship. So it's gonna be difficult during this generation because communication has become so available. You don't have to make an appointment, and the counselor can just send you messages anytime, right? So avoid going beyond entertaining any romantic or sexual intentions during counseling. It's not uncommon to fantasize during counseling. Some counselees will say things like, "You're everything, but my husband is not." They can say things like very suggestive, or you are the ones doing that. Right? So if you're a lady, the counselor might say, "You look very beautiful." And you can be strategic. You can say things like this. That's not related to what we're talking about right now. So can we move on to the topic you want to talk about? Or you can say that that's not very helpful right now. So can we move on to the topic you want to talk about? Do not take advantage of those who fantasize, again, transference. They can transfer positive emotion on you. You're such a good listener, Pastor. I wish my husband was more like you. You're so good in caring for me. I wish I had a boyfriend like you. Or I wish I had a girlfriend like you. So these suggestions should not be entertained. Should not be entertained. Transference, self-awareness during that moment. Being self-aware, I should not entertain this. Right? Fantasizing first during counseling. So be very aware of your fantasies, their fantasies. How about touching? My principle on touching is never touch. Never touch unless with permission. Unless with permission. Again, physical contact may be misinterpreted as a sexual advance or sexual invitation. Holding hands can be misinterpreted. The safest, the most neutral place to touch during a counseling is the shoulder. Right? Pat on the shoulder. Not this. Shoulder. Right? Even a hug can be misinterpreted. But again, ladies, you might hug, right? Right? If you're both ladies. But again, the principle really is I seldom touch counselors. Seldom touch. Even if they're crying, I seldom touch counselors. I let them cry. What about meeting outside your office? Again, can be, but maybe with the knowledge of your spouse, if you're married, I'm meeting this and so today. Is it okay? You'll be meeting at that restaurant, that cafe, at this moment. Will that be okay? Why is that important? Or telling your colleague if you're single to avoid gossip. They know, your colleagues and your spouse know. They're meeting there. I know it's a counseling relationship, not a date. And so telling somebody prior, if you're meeting, if you're going to meet outside, will be helpful. But again, meeting outside of your office is really discouraged. Again, it's really case-to-case basis. Right. What about in all this talk about inappropriate relationship and touching and meeting outside and relationship outside of the counseling? We can ask these questions for ourselves. How might my actions impact the counseling relationship? If I touch, will this make it more awkward? Or will this make this person fall in love with me more? How might my actions impact the counseling relationship? We can ask that for ourselves. Again, self-awareness. How might my behavior be interpreted by my fellow ministers or ministry partners? If I meet someone outside, or if I receive gifts, if I regularly text this person. And so we can ask these questions when we are in doubt of what to do. Why am I treating this counseling in an exclusive way? Am I exploiting the counseling in any way? Am I trying to buy the counselor's trust or affection to get his or her good books? And if I do this, who will this benefit, me or the counselee? If I engage in a romantic and sexual relationship, who will this benefit, her or me? So even if we have some doubts over what to do with these structures and boundaries, we still have these questions to guide us in making the right or the appropriate call at that moment. Especially the last question: who will benefit if I do this? Me? Will it help the counseling grow? Will it be for my own pleasure or for my own interest? Right? So if we are still in doubt over the structures and boundaries that making that call, we still have these questions that can help us. How about prayer? Should you pray during a counseling? Yes, go ahead and pray. Regularly, what I do is pray before the counseling. Pray before the counseling. Prayer should always be there. Pray before the counseling when you're not meeting. Pray before the counseling. The question is, and pray after the counseling. Pray for your counseling. But the more tricky question is, should you make prayer routine? Like before you counsel, can you pray? Or after the counseling, if you're still talking to that person, can you pray? You can pray when you're alone, right? Before you enter and when the person goes, pray. But the more tricky part is should you make prayer as a part of your routine? So again, even prayer, you have to be very sensitive when you lead a person to pray. Why? Because prayer can also be misused. In the Gospels, prayer is often misused. For example, Jesus says, don't do it like the hypocrites do. They pray outside to be heard. So what does that mean? Prayer can be misused. And how can you misuse prayer in the counseling relationship? You can inject your ideas in the prayer and suggest it to the client through the prayer. Instead of them making that decision or making that choice, you can inject your own ideas through the prayer. So be very careful. So how can you do it? If you're really led to pray, you can ask, can we pray? Yes, Pastor. What do you want to pray for? Ask the person, what does that person want to pray for? And pray for that. Don't pray your own agendas for this person. Right? Especially if that person is grieving, crying. Lord, make this person strong. I know he can do it. I know she can do it. But the person is still grieving. Maybe he or she is not in that stage yet. That person just needs to cry first. But you're already saying, I know she's strong. Right? So you can inject some things, your agenda in the prayer. So be very careful. Like there's a joke. There's a headline. I think it's a satirical news, satire news. Pastor caught inserting another sermon in his prayer. So, right? We can do that. Pastors can insert another sermonette in the prayer. So that's why prayer should be used with sensitivity and with care. Make sure you're really praying the person's desire. Right? Yes, Brother Randy. Yeah. Hindi naman. It's not wrong. It's not wrong, no? It's not wrong. But for me particularly, parang again, this is not counseling anymore, no? This is about leading the worship. Sige lang. For me, sa tingin ko kasi dyan, in my view on that is, it's like again, I'm not saying it's wrong. It for me, I just find it I just find it a little too much. I think that's the right word. Too much. Parang sobra na. You've already preached 30 minutes, 40 minutes. And now you're going to give me a long prayer that has still the points of your sermon in it. I just feel it's too much sometimes when pastors do that. Right? So, yun lang yung tingin ko doon. No? Parang sobra na. Parang you're it's like For the overload now, yun, it's quite overload and it's gonna be long. We've heard the sermon, we're blessed. So ayun, no? So, parang sa akin sa service, yun ang pakiramdam ko. That's how I feel minsan. Maybe it's too much, overload. Yun lang naman ang, that's just my, a reaction to when we preachers tend to insert another sermon in our prayer. All right. Okay, so prayer should be used with care. Some people don't like to pray. Some counselors don't like to pray. I've had counselors, should we pray? No. Because they're angry with God. How can they pray? Right? So you should be very sensitive. And that doesn't mean you don't love God, or that doesn't mean there's no God in your counseling. You can pray on your own, silently, as you go along. Lord, please help me in this counseling. Give me wisdom. Give me insight to help this person. You can pray on your own. But inviting the person to pray with you sometimes takes really sensitivity. Right? Because again, yes, Brother Randy. Right. Good. That's good. Yeah. Silently pray. That's why there should always be prayer in pastoral counseling. But the way to do it matters, right? If you pray together, synchronously, that will take a lot of sensitivity. But there should always be prayer, especially on your part, silently, as you're pleading with God during the counseling. All right. So this is what I was talking about, routine prayer. Right? So that ends our time. So just a summary, the counseling process is a different phases of a counseling. A counseling can take from first encounter, exploration of problem, and solution towards disengagement. So that's the counseling process. Again, there's always a process in the counseling. It can be spiral, it can be intermittent. And there are many considerations one must keep in mind in counseling: time, place, confidentiality, relational and ethical boundaries, and the use of prayer. So be mindful of these considerations so that we can have a healthy counseling ministry. Okay. So, yeah, ito na yan, wag na yan. Sige na nga. Ito na lang. Moral failings do not happen just because physical structures are present, such as doors are always open. Moral failings by spiritual leaders happen because of slow, long, cultivated disregard for personal integrity. So physical structures can help us, but again, it's how we cultivate our personal integrity as counselors that will matter in the end. It's not the doors open, closed, texting. We work first on our integrity, and out of that flows our habits of not texting, not meeting outside, not reciprocating romantic or sexual suggestions. So we must again take care of the instrument, the self, as the main tool for healing and counseling. Okay. Any thoughts? Initial thoughts on the beginning stages of counseling? Anything that stood out for you? Any insight or questions that might? Yes, Joshua.
For my case, I already started pastor. He said, right now, we are youth council. But he said, we should build the house and outside. That's where we
Yeah, again, it's fine if you're in that kind of you're in that kind of relationship, is it again? It will depend on what kind of counseling that you're gonna have. Like, is it for a problem or just mentoring? Right. So it's gonna matter what kind of relationship that you're gonna have. If it's like some sort of mentoring, and it's not really problem focused or any distress. So I think you can be flexible on that. So okay lang yun, you can be flexible on that. Again, if a person you don't know or a member, and I have a counseling relationship, I need to have a problem, then maybe you need a more discreet place, like a more discreet place. Some counseling happens outside because the place that you're in is not discreet, right? Ang daming tao. So some people can say, can we meet outside? Then you have to let your wife know or your husband know, right? Or some of your colleagues know that I'm gonna see someone here because we cannot talk here. It's so many people, and so that's why some people meet outside. But again, you can be flexible if your relationship with your youth pastor is more of a mentoring type, where you talk about your life and your walk with God, and it's more of a spiritual direction kind of relationship. So I think you can be flexible on it. How about others? Do you have some insight or any question you want to share? The topic we talked about is very practical things. Other Joel?
Just want to say thank you.
Uh,
I have a lot of mistakes.
you have a lot of what? Mistakes. That's okay. Yeah, we can learn from them. Anything else you may want to share? Anything that stood out for you? Anything else up? Sorry? You're good. Okay. All right. So if there are none, I guess we can call it a day. Thank you very much for spending time this morning. All right. Bye bye. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, sir.
So God be with you. Bye bye.